The screams echoed across the valley as Sarah stumbled through the fence line, her designer heels catching in the mud. Behind her, 300 pounds of furious alpaca thundered closer, their teeth bared and eyes wild with territorial rage. What had started as a simple shortcut to avoid her ex-husband's lawyers had become a nightmare in Marcus Chen. The ranch owner, watching from his porch, held the key to her freedom in his weathered hands. But as sirens wailed in the distance and Sarah's perfectly planned life crumbled around her, she realized the real predator wasn't the animal chasing her. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Chen family ranch as Marcus adjusted his worn baseball cap and surveyed the pasture where his prized alpacas grazed peacefully. At 35, he'd inherited more than just land from his grandfather. He'd inherited the responsibility of protecting something precious in a world that seemed determined to pave over everything beautiful. His phone buzzed. Another text from his ex-wife's lawyer about the custody arrangements for Emma. Marcus's jaw tightened as he read, the legal jargon that basically translated to, "Pay more, see your daughter less." He shoved the phone back into his pocket and tried to focus on the simple pleasure of watching Duchess, his prize-winning alpaca, nuzzle her newborn cria. The peace shattered when he spotted movement along the eastern fence line. A woman in a pristine white business suit was climbing through the barbed wire, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. She moved with the desperate urgency of someone running from something, constantly glancing over her shoulder as she struggled to navigate the uneven terrain in heels that clearly cost more than most people's monthly rent. Marcus frowned. The eastern border of his property ran along Millionaire's Row, a string of McMansions that had sprouted up over the past decade, each one more gaudy than the last. The wealthy residents usually ignored his existence, except when they complained about the farm smells or the occasional alpaca that wandered too close to their manicured lawns. This woman was different. She was trespassing with purpose. He grabbed his rifle from the porch not to threaten, but because experience had taught him that unexpected visitors in rural areas weren't always friendly, and headed toward the fence line. On the frost-covered grass as he approached the intruder, she was closer now, and he could see the fear in her eyes. Not the kind of fear you'd expect from someone caught trespassing, but something deeper, something that made her hands shake as she tried to smooth down her skirt. "Ma'am," Marcus called out, his voice carrying across the pasture. "This is private property." She froze like a deer in headlights, then slowly turned to face him. Up close, she was striking the kind of woman who belonged on magazine covers or in corporate boardrooms. But her makeup was smudged, and there was a wild edge to her perfectly composed facade. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice breathless. "I just needed to cut through. I'll be gone in a minute." "Cut through to where?" Marcus kept his rifle lowered, but visible. There's nothing but wilderness for miles in that direction. She glanced nervously toward the fence she'd just climbed through, then back at him. "Look, I can pay you." For the inconvenience, she fumbled in her purse and pulled out a wallet thick with cash. $500. Just pretend you never saw me." Marcus's eyes narrowed. In his experience, people who opened negotiations at $500 were either desperate or dangerous. Often both. "What's your name?" he asked. "Sarah," she replied quickly. Too quickly. Sarah, Jones. The lie was so obvious it was almost insulting. Marcus had been a ranch hand since he was 12, and he'd learned to read people the same way. He read weather patterns by watching for the signs others missed. "Well, Sarah Jones, I'm going to need you to head back the way you came. This isn't a public thoroughfare. Please." The word came out strangled, and for a moment the polished mask slipped completely. "I can't go back. You don't understand." "Then help me understand." Before she could answer, the distant rumble of car engines reached them. Multiple vehicles. Moving fast, Sarah's face went white. "They found me," she whispered. Marcus looked toward the road, where a convoy of black SUVs was turning into his driveway. They moved with a kind of precision that screamed law enforcement tour, something trying very hard to look like law enforcement. "Friends of yours?" he asked dryly. "I need to hide." Sarah's composure was cracking like ice on a warm day. "Please, you have no idea what these people are capable of." The lead SUV was already halfway down his driveway, kicking up clouds of dust. Marcus made a decision that would later keep him awake at night, wondering if he'd done the right thing. Now, they ran across the pasture, Sarah's heels making her stumble every few steps. Behind them, car doors slammed and voices shouted orders. Professional voices. Organized voices. The barn was a cathedral of weathered wood and sweet-smelling hay. Marcus guided Sarah to a stall in the back corner, behind a stack of feed bags. "Stay quiet," he whispered. "Whatever happens, don't make a sound." He'd barely made it back to the barn entrance when the first man appeared, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Marcus's truck. He had the kind of face that suggested he'd been hired more for his ability to intimidate than his conversational skills. Marcus Chen. The man's voice was smooth, as silk and twice as dangerous. "That's me. I'm Agent Reynolds, FBI." He flashed a badge so quickly Marcus barely saw it. "We're looking for a woman who may have crossed your property, about 5'6", blonde, wearing a white business suit." Marcus had dealt with enough government officials over the years to know when something didn't smell right. Real FBI agents didn't usually travel in convoys of matching SUVs, and they definitely didn't introduce themselves like movie villains. "Haven't seen anyone like that," Marcus replied. "But then again, I've been in the south pasture all morning. Mind if we take a look around?" It wasn't really a question. 3 more men had appeared behind Reynolds, each carrying enough firepower to level a small building. Marcus noticed they'd positioned themselves to cut off any escape routes. "Actually, I do mind." Marcus shifted his weight, feeling the familiar weight of his grandfather's rifle in his hands. "Unless you've got a warrant, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Reynolds smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "We're not here to cause trouble, Mr. Chen. We just want to find this woman. She's unstable, dangerous. We're worried she might hurt someone. Like I said, haven't seen her." The silence stretched between them like a guitar string about to snap. Marcus could feel sweat beating on his forehead despite the cool morning air. Behind him, somewhere in the depths of the barn, he heard the faintest rustle of movement. Reynolds heard it too. His smile widened. "You know, Mr. Chen, I've been reading about your situation. Custody battle with your ex-wife, mounting legal bills, threatening to lose this ranch that's been in your family for generations." He pulled out his phone and showed Marcus a photo. "Pretty little girl, Emma, isn't it? Be a shame if something happened to complicate your custody arrangement." The threat was delivered with the casual tone of someone commenting on the weather. But Marcus felt it like a physical blow. These weren't FBI agents, they were something much worse. "I think you boys need to leave," Marcus said quietly. "Now or what?" Reynolds laughed. "You'll shoot us with that antique rifle." What happened next would later be described by the local sheriff as the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. "And I've been in law enforcement for 30 years, Marcus whistled. Sharp, piercing, 3 quick notes. The alpacas in the nearby pasture, 15 of them lifted their heads in unison. For a moment, nothing moved. Then Duchess, the matriarch of the herd, let out a sound somewhere between a war cry and a foghorn. They came as a unit. 300 pounds of fury and instinct multiplied by 15. Alpacas might look like overgrown sheep, but they were camelids from creatures that had survived in some of the harshest environments on Earth. When threatened, they didn't run. They attacked. Reynolds and his men barely had time to process what was happening before the herd reached them. Duchess led the charge. Her neck stretched forward like a lance. Her teeth bared in a grimace that would have made a shark proud. The other alpacas flanked her, creating a wall of angry fiber and fury. "What the hell?" Reynolds backpedaled, his professional composure evaporating as Duchess spat a stream of green, stomach contents directly into his face. The other men scattered, their weapons forgotten as they realized they were outnumbered by creatures that seemed to take personal offense at their presence. One of them, a shorter man with a badly fitting suit, tried to stand his ground and got a mouthful of alpaca, spit for his trouble. "Call them off," Reynolds shouted, wiping his face with his sleeve. "Can't," Marcus replied, fighting back a grin. "They don't like strangers on their territory, especially ones who smell like fear and bad intentions." The alpacas had formed a semicircle around the intruders, herding them toward the vehicles like the world's most aggressive sheepdogs. Every time one of the men tried to break away, an alpaca would dart forward with a warning spit or a well-placed nip. Duchess, meanwhile, had taken a particular interest in Reynolds. She followed him step for step, her long neck weaving hypnotically. The Millfield County Sheriff's Department had never processed for federal impersonation arrests in a single day, let alone ones involving livestock assault charges. Sheriff Kate Brennan stood in her cramped office, watching the chaos unfold. Through her window, as news vans began arriving in the parking lot, "This is going to be a media nightmare," she muttered, turning to face Marcus and Sarah, who sat in the 2 chairs across from her desk. "You realize what you've done, don't you?" "Saved my daughter," Marcus replied simply. "And exposed a criminal." "Conspiracy," Sarah added, her phone still buzzing with notifications from the viral video that had already reached 2 million views. Sheriff Brennan sighed. She'd known Marcus since he was 12 years old, had watched him grow from a ranch hand into one of the most respected men in the county. But she'd also been in law enforcement long enough to know that good intentions didn't always lead to good outcomes. "Agent Morrison wants to talk to you both," she said. "She's setting up a safe house until we can figure out how deep this goes." "No safe house," Marcus said firmly. "I'm not leaving my ranch, and I'm not leaving my daughter." "Marcus, these people killed a lawyer and tried to kidnap Emma. They're not going to just disappear because you embarrassed them on social media." Sarah leaned forward, her manicured hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Sheriff, you don't understand. David has resources you can't imagine. If he wants Marcus dead, a safe house won't stop him. The only thing that will stop him is exposing everything. And how exactly do you propose we do that?" "The flash drive," Sarah said. "All the evidence is on a flash drive in my safety deposit box. Bank records, communication logs, medical research data that proves David and his pharmaceutical partners suppressed a cancer breakthrough." She looked at Marcus. "If we can get to it, we can end this." Sheriff Brennan shook her head. "The bank will be under surveillance. It's suicide." "Not if we're smart about it," Marcus said slowly. "David's people made one big mistake today. They underestimated what happens when you threaten a rural community." Before anyone could respond, Deputy Johnson burst through the door, his face flushed with excitement and fear. "Sheriff, you need to see this. Now." He led them to the main desk, where a television was tuned to a national news channel. The anchor, a polished woman with serious eyes, was speaking directly to the camera. Double quotes, ... developing story out of rural Montana, where a confrontation at an elementary school has led to the arrest of 4 men claiming to be federal agents. The incident, which was live-streamed on social media, has raised questions about the business practices of prominent philanthropist David Blackwood. The screen cut to footage from Sarah's phone, shaky but clear enough to show Reynolds threatening Marcus while Emma cowered in the classroom doorway. Then came the moment that had already become a meme. Duchess the alpaca charging through the school entrance like a woolly cannonball. The video has been viewed over 3 million times. The anchor continued, and has prompted calls for an investigation into Mr. Blackwood's charity foundation. Sheriff Brennan muted the television and turned to Sarah. "Congratulations. You just painted a target on everyone in this county." "I painted a spotlight," Sarah corrected. "David can't operate in the shadows anymore. The whole world is watching." Marcus's phone rang. The caller ID showed his ex-wife's number. "Marcus." Jennifer's voice was tight with panic. "I just saw the news. Is Emma okay?" "She's fine," Marcus said. "She's at the ranch with Mrs. Patterson and half the volunteer fire department. I'm coming to get her." "No." The word came out sharper than Marcus intended. "Jennifer, these people threatened to hurt her to get to me. Until this is over, the ranch is the safest place she can be." "The ranch? Marcus, you were just involved in a shootout at her school." "I was involved in protecting our daughter from kidnappers," Marcus corrected, "and I'll keep protecting her, whatever it takes." The line was quiet for a moment. Then Jennifer's voice, softer now. "What do you need?" The question surprised him. Their relationship had been toxic for years, defined by legal battles and bitter arguments. But when it came to Emma's safety, Jennifer had always been willing to put their differences aside. "Time," Marcus said, "and maybe some of that investigative journalism experience you used to brag about." "What do you mean?" Sarah gestured for the phone, and Marcus handed it over. "Mrs. Chen, this is Sarah Blackwood. I think you and I need to talk." 20 minutes later, Jennifer was sitting in Sheriff Brennan's office, her laptop open and her fingers flying across the keyboard. She'd driven down from Billings in record time, her auburn hair pulled back in a messy ponytail and her eyes blazing with the kind of intensity that had made her one of the state's most feared investigative reporters. "David Blackwood," she said, reading from her screen. Born in Chicago, inherited his father's pharmaceutical fortune at age 25. Married Sarah Montgomery 3 years ago, marriage that gave him access to her family's political connections. She looked up at Sarah. "Your father was Senator Montgomery, wasn't he?" "Yes," Sarah said quietly. "He died 6 months after David and I got married. Heart attack." Jennifer's fingers paused on the keyboard. "Natural causes. That's what the coroner said. But now, ... Sarah's voice trailed off. "Now you're wondering if David's been planning this longer than you thought," Jennifer finished. "How much did your father leave you?" $50 million, plus controlling interest in Montgomery Industries. Jennifer whistled low. "And if something happened to you, everything goes to David. Unless you're divorced first, which is why he's been trying to have me declared mentally incompetent." Dead wives raise questions. Crazy wives just disappear into institutions. Marcus watched his ex-wife work, remembering why he'd fallen in love with her in the first place. Jennifer had always been brilliant, but when she was chasing a story, she became something more a force of nature that could uncover secrets that powerful people had spent fortunes to hide. "I'm finding connections," Jennifer said, her eyes never leaving the screen. Blackwood Pharmaceuticals has been buying up smaller research companies for the past 5 years. Companies that were working on breakthrough treatments for cancer, Alzheimer's, diabetes, all the big money diseases. And then shelving the research, Sarah added. "David showed me the files once when he was drunk. He was proud of it. Said he was optimizing market opportunities by keeping people sick." Marcus said grimly. "By keeping people hopeful," Sarah corrected. "Sick people eventually die and stop being profitable. But hopeful people, people who think a cure is just around the corner, they'll spend everything they have, mortgage their houses, go into debt tall for the chance at a few more months of life." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. This wasn't just about embezzlement or even murder. This was about a systematic campaign to profit from human suffering on a massive scale. Sheriff Brennan's radio crackled to life. "Sheriff, we've got a situation at the Chen Ranch." Multiple vehicles approaching from the east. Marcus was already moving toward the door. "How many?" "Looks like 6 or 7. Big ones. Military style." "David's private security," Sarah said. "He's done playing games." "Then neither are we," Marcus replied. "Sheriff, I need you to call in every favor you've got. State police, FBI, hell, call the National Guard if you have to. Marcus, you can't fight a private army with a bunch of ranchers and some angry alpacas. Watch me." The drive back to the ranch took 15 minutes, but it felt like hours. Marcus's truck led a convoy that included Sheriff Brennan, 2 deputy vehicles, Agent Morrison's FBI unit, and Jennifer's rental car. Behind them, Sarah could see more vehicles joining the procession: pickups, farm trucks, and even an old-school bus that had been converted into a mobile command center by the volunteer fire department. "Your community really does look after its own," Sarah said, watching the growing parade in the side mirror. "This isn't about community anymore," Marcus replied. "This is about right and wrong. And your husband, he's on the wrong side of a line. That shouldn't exist." They crested the hill overlooking the ranch and saw the enemy force arrayed in the valley below. 7 black vehicles formed a semicircle around Marcus's property, their occupants using military-style tactics to establish a perimeter. Through binoculars, Marcus could see men in tactical gear setting up what looked like a command post near his barn. "They're not trying to hide anymore," Agent Morrison observed, joining them at the ridge. "This is a show of force." "Good," Marcus said. "Shows of force work both ways." He pulled out his phone and made a call. "Jake, it's time." "Time for what?" Sarah asked. Marcus smiled grimly. "Time for David Blackwood to learn what happens when you threaten a rancher's family." The sound started as a low rumble, barely audible over the wind. Then it grew, building into a thunderous roar that seemed to shake the earth itself. Over the next ridge, a line of vehicles appeared, not the sleek black SUVs of David's security team, but a ragtag collection of farm equipment that looked like it belonged in a different century. Leading the charge was Jake's combine harvester, its massive cutting blades gleaming in the afternoon sun. Behind it came a parade of tractors, threshers, hay balers, and other farming equipment, each one operated by a grim-faced rancher or farmhand. At the rear of the convoy, the discovery that David's people were impersonating congressional officials changed everything. What had started as a domestic dispute had just become a federal case involving election fraud, conspiracy, and sedition. Agent Morrison was already on her radio, calling in additional federal resources while Sheriff Brennan coordinated with state authorities. But Marcus's attention was focused on something else, entirely movement on the ridgeline to the west. Through his binoculars, he could see vehicles positioning themselves along the high ground, and the metallic glint of what looked like sniper scopes catching the afternoon sun. "He's not coming alone," Marcus said grimly, "and he's not planning to negotiate." Sarah followed his gaze and felt her stomach drop. David never does anything halfway. If he's here, it's because he's ready to end this permanently. Then we'd better be ready to. Marcus keyed his radio. "This is Marcus, to all units. We have hostiles on the western ridge. Assume they're armed and dangerous." The response was immediate. Harold's vintage tractor began moving toward higher ground, its ancient engine coughing like a dragon with asthma. Jake's combine harvester swung around to block the most likely approach routes, while the other farmers spread out to create overlapping fields of fire. "They're surrounding us," Agent Morrison observed, watching the tactical situation develop through her own binoculars. "No," Marcus corrected. "We're surrounding them. There's a difference." Down in the valley, the fake congressional delegation was beginning to realize their predicament. The man who'd claimed to be Congressman Hayes was now trapped between Duchess the alpaca and Harold's approaching tractor. His expensive suit wrinkled, and his political authority revealed as nothing more than costume theater. Marcus's phone rang. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize, but when he answered, David Blackwood's voice came through crystal clear. "Impressive little army you've assembled, Mr. Chen," David said. "But I think you're forgetting something important." "What's that?" "I don't need to win. I just need you to lose." Before Marcus could ask what that meant, Sarah grabbed his arm. "The bank," she said urgently. "He's not here to fight us. He's here to keep us busy while his people get to the safety deposit box." Marcus felt ice water flood his veins. They'd been outmaneuvered. While they were focused on the standoff at the ranch, David's real objective was 5 miles away in downtown Millfield. "Sheriff," Marcus called out, "we need units at First National Bank. Now." "Already on it," Sheriff Brennan replied, but her voice carried a note of defeat. "My deputy just radioed in. 3 black SUVs arrived at the bank 20 minutes ago. They had federal warrants and judicial orders. The bank manager had no choice but to give them access." Sarah's face went white. "The flash drive. They have it, maybe," Marcus said. "Or maybe your banker friend, Mr. Peterson, is smarter than David gives him credit for." As if summoned by his words, Marcus's phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed Millfield First National, Mr. Chen. "This is Bob Peterson. I think you're going to want to hear this." Marcus put the call on speaker. "What's the situation, Bob?" "Well, those federal agents you warned me about showed up with all the right paperwork. Looked official as hell, too. So I did exactly what any reasonable bank manager would do," which was, Bob Peterson's voice carried a note of satisfaction. That made Marcus smile. "I gave them access to Safety Deposit Box 347, just like their warrant specified." "Bob, that's Sarah's box number," Marcus said carefully. "Funny thing about that," Peterson continued. "See, Mrs. Blackwood called me this afternoon and asked me to move the contents of Box 347 to a different location. For security reasons, you understand, so when those federal agents opened that box, all they found was a note." "What kind of note?" "The kind that says, if you're reading this, you just committed a federal crime, along with the phone number for the real FBI field office in Helena." Sarah actually laughed a sound of pure relief mixed with vindictive joy. Bob Peterson, beautiful, sneaky man. "Where's the real flash drive?" Marcus asked. "Safe," Peterson replied, "and ready to be delivered to the proper authorities whenever you give the word." David's voice cut through their celebration like a blade. "You think you're very clever, don't you?" Marcus realized the line was still open to David's call. "Clever enough? Here's the thing about being clever, Mr. Chen. Sometimes it makes you forget to watch your back. That's when Marcus heard the sound that made his blood freeze. Emma's scream, echoing across the ranch from the direction of the house. He was running before his conscious mind had even processed the threat, his rifle forgotten as pure parental instinct took over. Behind him, he could hear Sarah and Agent Morrison following, but their voices seemed to come from a great distance. The house sat on a small rise overlooking the main pasture. Surrounded by the oak trees Marcus's grandfather had planted 50 years ago, it should have been the safest place on the ranch, protected by sight lines and the natural fortress of the tree line. Instead, it had become a trap. 3 men in tactical gear had somehow approached through the trees, using the chaos of the standoff to mask their movement. They had Mrs. Patterson and Emma cornered on the front porch. With nowhere to run and nowhere to hide, Marcus recognized the leader immediately. Reynolds, the man who'd claimed to be FBI that morning. His face was bruised, and his tactical vest was stained with what looked suspiciously like alpaca spit, but his eyes held the cold certainty of a professional killer. "That's far enough, Chen," Reynolds called out as Marcus approached. "Unless you want to see what happens to little girls who get in the way." Marcus stopped 50 yards from the porch, his hands raised but his mind racing. Emma was pressed against Mrs. Patterson's side, her 10-year-old face pale with terror, but her eyes held the same stubborn courage that had gotten Marcus through every hard moment of his life. "Let them go," Marcus said. "Your fight is with me." "My fight is with whoever pays me," Reynolds replied. "And Mr. Blackwood pays very well for results." "What does he want?" "Simple. Your friend Sarah walks down to the valley and surrenders herself to my custody. In exchange, your daughter gets to live." "And if I refuse?" Reynolds smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Then we find out how much noise a 10-year-old can make." The threat hung in the air like smoke from a wildfire, poisonous and inescapable. Marcus could feel Sarah moving up beside him, could sense her preparing to sacrifice herself to save Emma. But before either of them could speak, a new voice cut through the tension. "Mister, you made one big mistake." Emma's voice was small but steady, and Reynolds made the error of looking down at her with amusement rather than wariness. "What's that, little girl? You hurt Mrs. Patterson's feelings, and Duchess really doesn't like it when people hurt her friends." Reynolds was still processing this statement when 300 pounds of furious alpaca came crashing through the tree line like a woolly meteor. Duchess had somehow circled around behind the house, using the same tactical awareness that had served her species for thousands of years in the Andes Mountains. The first Reynolds knew of his danger was when a shadow fell across him. He looked up just in time to see Duchess descending like the wrath of God, her neck stretched forward and her eyes blazing with protective fury. The impact knocked him clean off the porch and into Mrs. Patterson's prized rose bushes. His 2 companions tried to bring their weapons to bear, but Duchess was already moving, her massive form spinning with surprising grace as she kicked one man with her hind legs while simultaneously spitting a stream of green digestive fluid at the other. Marcus didn't waste the opportunity. He was moving before Reynolds hit the ground, covering the distance to the porch in seconds, while Duchess continued her assault on the tactical team. Behind him, he could hear Sarah and Agent Morrison shouting orders, but all his attention was focused on reaching Emma. His daughter launched herself into his arms with the fearless abandon of a child who'd never doubted her father would come for her. Mrs. Patterson was shaken but unharmed, though she was staring at Duchess with a mixture of gratitude and amazement. "Is everyone okay?" Marcus asked, running his hands over Emma to check for injuries. "We're fine, Daddy," Emma said. "Mrs. Patterson taught me how to call for help, using the radio like you showed me. That's how Duchess knew where to find us." Marcus looked at his daughter's teacher, a woman in her 60s who'd spent 40 years educating ranch children and apparently picked up a few survival skills along the way. "Mrs. Patterson, you're officially my hero." "Save the celebrations, Agent," Morrison called out as she approached the porch. "We've got bigger problems." She was right. Down in the valley, the standoff was escalating. More vehicles had arrived, these ones bearing the unmistakable markings of private military contractors. David's resources were apparently deeper than any of them had imagined. "How many?" Marcus asked, accepting the binoculars Agent Morrison offered. 24 hostiles, plus whatever's left of the fake congressional delegation. she replied. "They've got us outnumbered and outgunned." "Not outgunned," a new voice corrected, "just differently gunned." Harold appeared through the trees, his ancient rifle slung across his back and a grin on his weathered face. Behind him came Jake, then Mrs. Rodriguez from the feed store, then Tom Anderson who ran the gas station, then dozens of other faces, Marcus H.